Why your best metric is lying to you and costing you millions. Your biggest recruiter just hit 2.3 million in billings this quarter. Pretty friggin' impressive. And that's 40% of your entire firm's revenue. You're feeling pretty good about it. You should probably feel scared, because there's a really good chance that recruiter's actually dragging down your profitability, and your financials are hiding that fact. Most recruiting agencies run their entire business on one metric, which is billings. But billings can be a lie, or at least they can be a lie about what actually matters. And if you're optimizing for billings instead of metrics that predict profit, you're building a business on sand. Okay, let's get more specific. In this example, your top recruiter put 2.3 million on the board. That's real money coming in. But let's look at the actual cost of producing that number. Her pay, say 120K. Her benefits, FICA, SUTA burden, things like that, maybe $20,000. Her desk costs, accounting for phone, laptop, software, 5 to 10K. Management or client management overhead to keep her accounts happy, say another $10,000 allocated. All in, that's a $155,000 to $180,000 of all-in cost to put that 2.3 million on the board. So far, it looks good, right? That's just over 6.5% of the cost of production, which is pretty solid. What's your fallout rate of her placements? If it's, say, 40%, that means that 40% of the candidates that she places come back within 90 days because they maybe didn't work out. Suddenly, you're not retaining 2.3 million. You're maybe retaining 1.3 and change. And when a placement falls out, you have to reservice it, right? Another candidate, another client conversation, another handhold. She's burning cycles on reworking instead of new revenue. Or, here's the other angle. What if her average gross margin on her placement was 18%, while the rest of your firm was 24%? Maybe she's discounting heavily to book business. Maybe she's taking riskier placements with lower quality clients. Maybe she's moving fast without qualifying properly. That same 3.2 million in billings, but the actual profit on that line is 25% lower. In other words, your best biller is not your most profitable recruiter. You just can't see it because you're looking at billings, right? You're looking at the incorrect metric there. So, what should you be looking at instead? Let me give you the framework that actually predicts profit. Metric number 1 to care about is stage to stage conversions. Not how many placements did we make, but how many qualified source candidates did you submit? And what percentage of those candidates got interviews? And what percentage of those turned into placements? Why? Because this reveals the quality of your sourcing and your screening, right? If you source 100 candidates and 60 get interviews, but another team sources 80 and gets 50 interviews, the second team is much more efficient. They're qualifying better upstream. Same submission count, different efficiency, different profitability. Metric number 2 is the fallout and refund exposure. I'm talking about placements that don't stick inside of the first 90 days. In the industry, fallout percentages range from anywhere from 15 all the way up to 50%, depending on the vertical and type of placement. So, if your top recruiter has a 40% fallout rate, while your average recruiter has a 20% rate, you have a problem. Because 40% fallout means 40% rework. And rework has a... One staffing agency owner I was reading about calculated in this way. For every placement that falls out in the first 90 days, they lose 60% of the margin they originally made because they have to source, screen, find a replacement candidate, and sometimes have to give the client a replacement guarantee that comes with a compressed margin further. So a 5K margin placement that falls out becomes a 2K placement that can be a $3,000 hit for one fallout. And so in that same math, if your top recruiter has a 40% fallout on 100 placements per year, that's 40 placements times 3K. That's $120,000 in lost profit. Metric number 3, gross profit per recruiter, not billings per recruiter. This is one that nobody talks about, but really should. If I look at some industry data, right, like the Bullhorn Grid report from this year, here's what they found. Firms that track profitability per recruiter, not just billings, are significantly more likely to be in a growth tier. Why? Because when you actually track profit instead of billings, you start asking questions like, why is this recruiter's cost per hire 30% higher than average? Why is this recruiter, or why has this recruiter high billings but low margins? Like, what's going on here? Are they discounting to move business? Are they a low margin vertical, or are they taking higher risk clients? Those questions lead to discussions. That recruiter might need a vertical pivot, or a client portfolio change, or a conversation around discount strategy. But if you're only looking at billings, you never know to ask those questions. Here's where it gets interesting, and honestly where co-recruit comes in. The reason most agencies can't track these metrics properly is data fragmentation. Your ATS has placement data, your accounting system has cost and margins, your timekeeping system has recruiter activity, your Slack has follow-up notifications whenever it makes it back in the system, but nobody's stitching that together in real time. So when I ask an agency owner, what's your follow-up rate per recruiter? And they say, honestly, I don't know. I have to dig through my ATS and probably some follow-up emails. And when you can't measure something easily, you stop measuring it. And when you stop measuring it, you just can't change it. What they are able to find through co-recruit is by analyzing those specific calls, they can actually see that it turns out she was discounting placements heavily to close those deals faster, which was good for billings, but not for profits. The owner was then able to have a conversation with her, adjusted her compensation structure towards margins instead of pure volume, and her follow-up rate came down to 26% in 3 months. Same recruiter, different behavior, different profit. But if you can't do that, if your data is fragmented, you're not tracking the right things, you don't have the insight to analyze what's happening in those calls, things are going to be fragmented. Here's what we're seeing. Agencies that have visibility into this call data, so who actually listen to recruiter calls at scale, can dive into the specific ones, grade how things are being qualified, and honestly, what's even being asked about candidates there. Those agencies are catching these problems in real time instead of discovering them in their P&L at the end of the year. Because when you can hear what a recruiter is actually saying on a call, you can coach it. When you can identify these patterns, oh, you're not asking the start date, you're accepting a weak compensation objection, or you're not confirming next steps in writing. Those are coachable moments, and coaching leads to better outcomes. I want to get back to something from that industry report. One of the findings was that agencies that embed AI across their entire workflow, so again, things like note-taking, candidate screening, submittal generation, were seeing faster placements. But they were also seeing better quality of hire and lower fallouts. Not worse, but better. Why is that? Because when you automate note-taking, your data doesn't get degraded. When you automate candidate submissions, you can actually apply consistent criteria across these teams. So when we know what's working for Fred, we can easily scale that to John across the team. Speed doesn't come at the expense of quality. It came because the process got more consistent. So if we compare that to an agency where speed comes from cutting corners, low qualification standards, faster but maybe lower quality sourcing, less due diligence on these candidates, that same placement, lower quality, higher fallout, lower margins, the agencies that are genuinely fast and profitable, that's not because they're cutting corners. They're fast because they're systemized. And that systemized requires data visibility. You can't systemize what you can't see. Okay, so here's what actually moves the needle. Level 1, audit your metrics, right? Stop using billings as your primary KPI. Look at things like cost per recruiter. Look at that stage to stage conversion. Look at things like your fallout rates. Look at cost per hire and that margin compression. Lever number 2, get visibility into the work, because you can't manage what you can't see and track. And if you're managing recruiters based on just what they're telling you happened on the call, you're flying blind. And if you can listen to calls, audit them at scale, understand what they're actually saying, what questions they're asking, how they're qualifying, you can actually start to coach this. Lever number 3, connect your data. You need placement data, call data, cost data, all in one system. So you can actually ask the question, this recruiter has high billings, but why is her fallout rate so high? What's she doing differently on these calls? That question can only be asked if you can see the data. And lever number 4, compensate for what you want. If you want profit, pay for profit. If you want quality, pay for retention. If you want margins, pay for margins. Right now, most agencies pay for billings. So the recruiters optimize for billings and then wonder why their profit is down while revenue is up. Most agencies are flying blind on this. So if you're managing to do billings instead of profit, the gap is probably way bigger than you think. We dive into this in this channel consistently between metrics, data, visibility, what's actually driving profitability across staffing, executive search, or even boutique search. So hit subscribe if you want to see the data behind these decisions. Thanks.